It is time. I don't know where this week's gone, by the way. It's Thursday already, so it's time to speak to Helen Dale. Helen, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
I'm very well, but I am quite alarmed at how fast the time is going. I mean, I'm quite happy that it's going fast, because the faster it goes, the sooner we get out of this bleeding lockdown, I hope, because it's beginning to look like the government might actually take a stand and start opening things up.
Well, yes, this lockdown has been both more unpleasant because we haven't all been able to go out in the sunshine like we could with the first time. But it has, because people do tend to stay at home in winter anyway, and we had incredibly cold weather last week, like nationally really cold weather. I mean, so you basically didn't really have to lock people down because they were voluntarily staying home anyway. Even people who were notionally key workers, particularly up in Scotland, they couldn't get to work because the roads were just piled high with snow or just death traps. Oh, would you like a bit of black ice with your travels?
Yes, no, absolutely right. And January is a month when a lot of people do stay home as well. But equally, it has been difficult, I think, for more people because it's so long ago that it started. People have said, had the government sort of not been locking down for most of the previous 12 months, it would have been understandable, but it was less understandable now that we were being asked to do it yet again. But at least this time...
And the irony is too, is that the vaccines are clearly working. We've already had data from Israel, which a little country, small population, and a very good vaccine rollout showing that they're dropping the infection rates. And whilst Britain is behind Israel, that's the only country realistically that we're behind, and you're starting to get the same effect here as well, which is a very positive thing. I mean, it is helpful for Boris Johnson, this, like after all the stuff ups with the care homes and PPE and that happened at the beginning of the pandemic, suddenly the vaccine rollout has just worked fabulously well, and that of course is going to be the last thing that everybody remembers. So you mentioned Keir Starmer. I actually feel Labour is in travails at the moment, and I do feel a bit sorry for Keir Starmer, even though I'm not a Labour voter, because I believe in the idea of Her Majesty's loyal opposition. And you only get good government when the opposition is able to oppose. And Starmer's not been able to do that effectively, either because of he hasn't disagreed. I mean, Labour didn't oppose at all with the lockdown or SAGE, and if anything they wanted to go further, so he didn't oppose there. And he has been quite badly hamstrung by the internal conflicts in Labour over Corbyn and anti-Semitism, and then of course over Brexit, because he was the author of Labour's silliest policy, which was the whole second referendum policy. That doesn't mean he's a bad person or a bad leader or stupid or anything like that, but he's just been placed in a very, very difficult position.
Well, he doesn't seem to be very popular, really, with anybody in the Labour Party at the moment. So, I mean, it's about the worst place you could possibly be. Leader,
well,
but everybody hates him.
Well, the fence sitting that he always had a weakness for has become very apparent now. Keir Starmer's bottom is as full of splinters as Jeremy Corbyn's bottom was when it comes to sitting on the fence. And at first it seemed that wouldn't be the case with Starmer. He was less of a fence sitter. And in certain areas, he was very good and very proactive, like trying to deal with the anti-Semitism in Labour. He has been very good there. But in a lot of other areas, yes, the fence sitting is emerging, and he now just looks like he's incapable of making a decision.
Well, that's the problem, because leaders lead by making decisions and by making choices and by making policy. And quite frankly, he hasn't done any of those things. And for him now to say that he's making a keynote speech which is setting out the long-term vision for the party, I mean, all we've heard for the last week from members of the Labour Party front bench is that this is not the time to be giving out Labour Party policy because it's too far away from the election.
Election.
Yeah, so he's now even going against his own policy.
Well, yes, it's the classic case of let's have the Labour shadow front bench all fight like cats in a sack for public entertainment and consumption.
Exactly. Let's talk a little bit about the Gavin Williamson manoeuvre from yesterday, where you'll be very familiar with the sort of cancel culture that's been existing in our academic halls of excellence, as they call themselves, for many a year now. you know, all the way back to Amber Rudd being cancelled from Oxford, where she was thought to be an unsavoury character, despite all of the various things that she had done, not only for her own sort of audience, but also for women in general. And this idea that, you know, students can object to something, therefore somebody cannot be heard.
Well, we've actually got quite a serious problem across the developed world in universities with ideological conformity. This is not just a problem in Britain. It is a problem throughout the developed world. It seems to be worse in English-speaking countries, and also if you read the French press, there are concerns in France as well that some of the same problems are developing in France. It's less of an issue in Germany, and it seems to be less of an issue in Spain and Italy. And I think it was in Le Parisien, I saw a piece, the French were saying that a lot of the ideas that are causing the censoriousness in universities globally originally came from France. And it is to the credit of the French tertiary education sector and also the French government that they never took root in French society or politics. But what has happened is that they've been packaged up in a palatable and grossly oversimplified way. That's the other thing. Point. A lot of French people have made this point. They've taken ideas that are quite sophisticated and interesting from French academics and then bent them out of shape. And the people responsible for bending them out of shape and grossly oversimplifying and generally being terribly authoritarian in a way that was not intended by any of the French thinkers who kept, like Foucault and so on, Lacan and whatnot, who came up with these ideas, has happened in the United States. And it's been getting worse over decades. And there is actually in America, where they realized this was a problem, a serious problem, probably sooner than every other country. There's actually research going back over 20 years done by a number of people, including a psychiatrist and neurologist called Jonathan Haidt. It's spelled H-A-I-D-T, but apparently he says it's Haidt, not hate. He doesn't want his surname to be hate. But basically, he documented over decades how the tertiary education sector, the academics, and even worse, and this is a really serious problem, the administrators, overwhelmingly were on the political left. They weren't any sort of political left. You know, you're not talking about Joe Biden here or people who would agree with Joe Biden. You're not dealing with sort of mainstream Democrats. You were dealing with people who were doctrinaire Marxists. You know, people who believe the economic equivalent, you know, things like the Labour theory of value. You know, this is like setting up a biology department and teaching creationism as though it was true.
Well, also,
pseudoscience.
I've never understood these sort of far left Marxist types who work within a capitalist system. You know, because there are many ways of rebelling against a capitalist system. One of them is not living within it and working within it and kind of abiding by its rules. And there's any number of places you could go and live if that's where you wanted to be.
And some of them do sincerely, because there are two extremes. There's the weird ideological extreme with the left, the Marxists, but not just Marxists. You get this reformulated French theory, which is also a form of left-wing thinking, and they and the Marxists, the postmodernists and the Marxists, are often at each other's throats. Because the original French postmodernists, one of the reasons why they came up with the arguments and the thinking that they did, and this is the likes of Foucault, is Marxism failed, and it failed before their eyes. Yes. So that's, people don't like to sort of acknowledge that, but I mean, that's why you will sometimes, there are places where the likes of Michel Foucault and F.A. Hayek, and Hayek was a right libertarian, although he hated the word libertarian, he thought it was an ugly word. There are times when intellectually those two men actually line up, but the reason they line up is because both of them were doing a version of turning around, pointing at Marxism and going, ha ha, that doesn't work. Yeah. Look at you,
but why are these modern day kind of cancel culture types so frightened of the opposing view or of any view which is not theirs?
Well, they actually believe, and this is the simplified American form of postmodernism, and it's described by critics like Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay as reification, which is where basically something that is a theoretical idea about the world, you believe to be real, to be true and solid. Now, the claim is that if you live in a world where reality is constructed by language, discourses of power is the expression that is sometimes used, you then think sincerely, and people do sincerely believe, that you can make the world a better place by controlling what everybody says.
Right.
Because it means that those discourses of power will not be able to be constructed and will not be able to be reified and become solid and real and effective.
Yeah.
So
they actually believe that if you don't hear about other ideas, you will only listen to theirs.
Yes.
That's quite sinister, isn't it?
It is very sinister, and this is very much. I mean, I was forced to read in my first degree. I was forced to read some Foucault, and I thought some of his ideas were really quite alarming, as well as just being in error. Yeah. I mean, one of his books was, he attempted to do a series of books on the history of sexuality. I mean, and I was a classics student at the time, and he was popping off about classical Greece and classical Rome, you know. And people like me knew the language, and he obviously didn't. And just making assertions about things that if you had done first year Latin or Greek, you just knew were to be false. So there were problems with. I'm not singing his praises here, but there were problems intellectually with a lot of this stuff. There is a lot of pseudoscience in it, but this belief that you can construct reality by the way you speak. There's a bit of it in the likes of Foucault and Derrida and Lacan and people like that, but it is very mild. The people who've gone nuts with it and who really do have gone through this process of reification, where if you control what comes out of people's mouths, you can literally control what's in between their ears. So it is very much the newspeak at the end of 1984. That is the animating thinking that feeds into this.
Yes.
That is very American, which is why French people are alarmed, including many French left-leaning academics, and also why British people are alarmed at inevitably the response when we encounter this, French and Brits, coming from Americans, is to say, 1984 was a novel, not an instruction manual.
Well, exactly right. And I mean, was it partly our own fault, though, if you like, because we allowed certain voices to be silenced because we thought they were a bit too extreme. Therefore, that happened, and then the dial sort of moved further down the spectrum, if you like, to more moderate type people who are now being cancelled because they're thought of as extreme.
Well, yes, and this is an argument that a chap at Birkbeck, a political scientist called Eric Kaufman, makes. Basically, the slippery slope in this circumstance turned out to be real. So they started with people like the BNP, I suppose, is probably no platform for fascists. Yeah. And at the time, and also the social media companies, when they banned they banned the bloke with the tinfoil hat, Alex Jones. Yeah. And the woman Silky Carlo at Big Brother Watch was the only one who got up and said, it's not going to stop there. You realise this, you're all laughing at the nutter who wears the tinfoil hat and goes bright red on telly. Yeah. But it's not going to stop there. And she's turned out to be absolutely right. Yes. That it didn't stop there. I mean, no platforming from the very beginning came from the left, and originally it came from the Marxist left. I mean, the postmodernists took it from them and then started using it on them. That's the other thing. You get the punishment of conventional socialists now because they prefer a class analysis to a race analysis in Britain.
Yes, I mean, it is unfortunate. It's also unfortunate that we've already reached the time because we're going to have a little listen to Keir Starmer. We didn't get to the Dubai story, but we will get to that. We may pick it up next week. Helen, thank you very much indeed. Helen Dale, writer, lawyer, political commentator. A lot of people have said that you've got to be careful who you ban from speaking, because if you ban people from speaking and they successfully are banned, then the next person that gets banned from speaking might be you. Do you see what I'm saying?